A 10-year-old boy in leg braces reaches out to dance in Manhattan's ritziest restaurant, but the manager's sharp command, "Control your son," cuts through the air, freezing every eye on him. Why is this brave kid's moment being shut down, and what happens when a waitress dares to say yes? The buzz at Kingsley's, Manhattan's swankiest restaurant, came to a dead stop that night. Forks froze mid-bite, chatter dropped to a hush, and the air got so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. This wasn't the usual upscale dinner vibe, no clinking glasses or polite laughs. Something big was brewing, right there in the heart of the dining room, and it was about to shake up everyone in it. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery stood nervously at the edge of the polished floor, his metal leg braces creaking with every tiny shift. His hand stretched out, trembling just a bit, toward Diana Johnson, the only black waitress in the place. The piano's soft melody had just kicked in, and on a whim, Lucas decided he wanted to dance. His steps were slow, wobbly, each one a battle against the braces holding him up. "Sir, please, control your son." The manager, Thornton, snapped from across the room, his voice cutting like glass. He sounded like he'd been running this show forever, dripping with that "I'm in charge" energy. "This isn't a dance club, and our staff isn't here to play with kids." At the table, Richard Montgomery, one of the richest guys in the country, think big-shot investor, empire builder, felt his chest tighten. His son Lucas had been partially paralyzed after a car accident 2 years back. This dinner was their first big outing since, and Richard was already regretting it. He'd hoped for a quiet night, not this. "Lucas, come back and sit," Richard said, his voice low but firm, his eyes locked on his son, willing him to listen. Diana, though, didn't move. Her gaze flicked between the manager's scowl and the Montgomery family, reading the room like she'd done 1,000 times in her 5 years here. She'd mastered the art of fading into the background, especially around power players like Richard. Being a black working-class woman in a place like this, you learn to stay invisible. But something about Lucas's outstretched hand hit different. This wasn't just a kid asking for a dance. It was him putting himself out there, brave and unguarded. "Mr. Thornton," Diana said, her voice steady, as she untied her apron and folded it neatly. "My shift's done." The room was already buzzing with whispers, but then she did something nobody saw coming. She flashed Lucas a warm, real smile and took his hand. "No dancing in an apron," she said, her tone light but with purpose, like she'd already decided this moment mattered. Richard shot to his feet, his face red with shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice carrying that billionaire authority, the kind that usually made people snap to attention. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir," Diana replied, not backing down an inch. The second she took Lucas's hand and started moving with him across the floor, the whole vibe shifted. Her steps matched his slow, careful pace, the creak of his braces mixing with the piano's soft notes. She didn't pull or push him, she just stayed with him, letting him set the rhythm. "She's done for," someone muttered at a nearby table, half laughing, like it was just gossip. But the moment wasn't about rumors. It was heavier, deeper. Richard stood frozen, his mind pulling him somewhere else, back to his late wife Elizabeth twirling Lucas in their living room. "It's not about being perfect," she'd said, her smile soft. "It's about being together." Lucas's face changed as he moved with Diana. The fear in his eyes melted into focus, maybe even pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being led. He was leading. Diana just followed, giving him space to shine. The whole restaurant went quiet, every eye glued to them, waiting for Richard's next move. A guy like him could shut this down with one word. His wealth, his name, his power. It all hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Mr. Montgomery," Thornton broke in, his voice sharp with panic. "This won't happen again. She'll be dealt with." Richard didn't answer right away. The room held its breath, tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Everyone, waiters, diners, even the pianist, watched, waiting for the hammer to drop. But then Lucas smiled, small but real, and it was like the only sound in the room. Diana guided him back to the table after a few steps, her movements graceful, deliberate. She looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "Thanks for asking me to dance," she said. "It was an honor." As she turned to go, Richard's voice stopped her. "Hold on," he said, something new in his tone, part awe, part confusion. "What's your name?" "Diana Johnson, sir," she answered, calm and clear. Richard nodded, like he was filing it away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card, and handed it to her. "Come to my office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. The room went dead silent. Diana took the card, her hand steady, her face giving nothing away. "Thank you," she said, and walked off, leaving everyone stunned. "Dad," Lucas said quietly as she disappeared, "why'd you do that?" The question hit Richard like a punch. He didn't answer right away, just watched Diana's figure fade into the kitchen. Something in him stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. Dinner dragged on in awkward silence, but Lucas's question echoed louder than the clinking silverware. Richard's mind was spinning. He'd been so wrapped up in his empire, his deals, his grief, his son's accident, that he'd missed something big. Lucas wasn't just a kid to protect, he was a person full of fight and heart. And Diana, she wasn't just a waitress. That dance wasn't just a dance, it was a wake-up call. For the first time, Richard saw it. The biggest changes don't come from grand plans or big checks. They come from small moments, like a boy reaching out and a woman saying yes. The morning sun poured into the lobby of Montgomery Tower, turning the marble and glass into a golden glow that screamed wealth and power. Diana Johnson, though, felt like she stuck out like a sore thumb as she stepped through the revolving doors. She'd put on her best outfit, a navy skirt and white blouse she'd snagged on clearance, but it didn't match the designer suits buzzing around her. These people probably spent more on a single shirt than she did on rent. She walked up to the receptionist, keeping her cool even though her stomach was doing flips. "Diana Johnson, here to see Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady. The receptionist gave her a quick once-over, her eyes cold and assessing, before picking up the phone. "18th floor, Miss Winters will meet you," she said, barely looking up. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Diana stood tall, clutching her beat-up purse, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She wasn't scared, not exactly. It was more like a quiet resolve, the kind you build after years of facing tougher rooms than this. When the doors slid open, a woman in her 40s with a sharp stare and perfect posture was waiting. "Mr. Montgomery's on a call," Miss Winters said, her tone clipped. "Follow me." As they walked through the mirrored hallways of the executive floor, Diana caught the sidelong glances from employees. "A black woman up here?" Yeah, that wasn't a common sight. Whispers followed her, soft but sharp, like little pinpricks. She kept her head high, ignoring them. They reached a waiting area, and Winters turned to her, adjusting her glasses with a look that was almost too chummy. "He got you fired, didn't he?" she said, like it was just casual chat. "Happens all the time. Big clients make a call, and people like you get the boot." "People like me?" Diana's voice was calm, but there was a cool edge to it, like she was daring Winters to say more. Winters blinked, caught off guard, but her phone buzzed before she could dig herself deeper. She glanced at it. "He's ready for you now." Diana followed her down the hall to Richard Montgomery's office, and man, the place was something else. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off Manhattan like it was Richard's personal playground. He stood by one of those windows, staring out at the city like he owned every inch of it. When he heard her come in, he turned, his face slipping into that polished billionaire mask. "Miss Johnson," he said, smooth as ever. "Thanks for coming. Have a seat." Diana sat back straight, ready for whatever he was about to throw at her. The silence stretched out, heavy and deliberate. She knew this game. He was trying to rattle her, make her squirm or overshare. But Diana wasn't playing. She met his gaze, unflinching, waiting him out. "So," Richard said finally, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about your background." His tone was cool, like he was interviewing her for a job she didn't ask for. "Excuse me?" Diana raised an eyebrow, not giving him an inch. "Education. College," he clarified like it was obvious. "Bachelor's in Child Development from NYU. Incomplete," she said, her voice even. "Master's in Special Education. Also incomplete." Richard's eyes flickered with surprise, but he covered it quick. "And you're a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs," Diana shot back, firm but not defensive. "The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can find students." Richard got up, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder. He flipped it open, scanning the pages like he was reading her life story. "I looked into you, Miss Johnson," he said, his voice softer now, but still calculating. "I wanted to know who danced with my son." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were photos from a community center, Freedom Steps, a dance program for kids with physical disabilities. Diana didn't flinch, just sat up a little straighter. "I co-founded it," she said, a quiet pride in her voice. "With my sister, Zoe." Richard kept flipping through the pages. "And now it's about to shut down. No funding," he said, almost like he was stating the weather, but his eyes were sharp, watching her reaction. Diana didn't blink. She'd known he'd dig into her life, and she was ready for it. "I didn't come here to ask for your money, Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice steady as steel. He let out a short laugh, no warmth in it. "Then why are you here?" "Because you asked me to come," she said, meeting his stare head-on. Richard leaned back, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite crack. "I want you to work for me," he said. "All business now." Diana's eyebrows shot up. "As a waitress in your house?" "No," he said, his voice hardening. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." She caught the way his eyes flicked to a photo on his desk. A woman holding a baby, probably Lucas and his late mom. Richard's face stayed blank, but Diana could feel the pain behind his words. "I've got the best specialist money can buy," he went on, sounding almost desperate. "Physical therapists, neurologists, you name it. But what you did with Lucas yesterday—" He trailed off like the words were too heavy to finish. "It was just a dance," Diana said softly but firm. "It was the first time I saw him smile since his accident." Richard's eyes softened just for a second. "I don't need a dancer. I need someone who can do what you did, follow his lead, not take over." Diana watched him closely. Behind the suit and the power, she saw a dad who was lost, grasping for answers in a world he couldn't control. "I can pay you 5 times what you're making," he said, like money was the answer to everything. Diana stood, her movements calm but final. "No." Richard's jaw dropped. "You're saying no to an offer that could fix your money problems? Because of pride?" "Not pride," she corrected, her voice steady. "Dignity. And because Lucas deserves someone who cares for real, not someone paid to act like it." She paused at the door, turning back. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs room to lead his own life." Richard opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You don't know my son." "No," she agreed, "but I know kids like him. Their real limits aren't their bodies, it's the cages we build around them." With that, she walked out, leaving Richard alone with her words and the weight of everything he still didn't understand. The community center's front desk was a familiar spot for Diana Johnson, but that morning it felt different, like the air was charged with something new. Freedom Steps wasn't much to look at. No fancy decor, just handmade posters with sayings like, "Your rhythm, your rules," and "Every move counts" plastered on the walls. But it had heart, and that's what kept Diana coming back. As she walked in, her sister Zoe, co-founder of the program, rushed over, her eyes wide, adjusting her hijab nervously. "Diana, there's a Bentley parked outside," Zoe whispered, half excited, half freaked out. "You're not going to believe who's in it." Diana peeked through the window, her pulse picking up. There it was, a sleek black car that screamed money. In the back seat, Lucas Montgomery sat, his eyes darting around nervously, his leg braces glinting in the sunlight. And behind the wheel, Richard Montgomery, gripping the steering wheel like he was bracing for a fight, his face tight and unsure. "He's not coming in," Zoe said, shaking her head. "Guys like him don't show up to places like this." Diana just smiled, a quiet spark in her eyes. "Don't bet against a kid with a mission," she said, more to herself than Zoe. She'd seen the look on Lucas's face last night during their dance. Pure determination. That boy wasn't here by accident. Before Zoe could argue, the car door swung open. Lucas climbed out, slow and careful, adjusting his braces with focus. Then, to everyone's shock, Richard stepped out too. No suit today, just casual pants and a sweater, like he was trying to blend in. Spoiler, he didn't. The guy still looked like he owned half of Manhattan. "Told you," Diana murmured, her smile growing. Zoe stared, mouth half open. "What did you do?" she hissed, like Diana had pulled off some kind of magic trick. Diana didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she took Lucas's hand last night, when she stood her ground in that restaurant, and when she walked away from Richard's offer. This wasn't just a moment, it was part of something bigger. Back in her tiny Bronx apartment, tucked under her bed, was a notebook stuffed with years of notes, research, plans, strategies. It was all about kids like Lucas and parents like Richard, about creating space for people the world overlooked. That dance last night? It wasn't just a dance, it was the first step in a plan she'd been building for years. Inside Freedom Steps, the vibe was alive. Kids with crutches, wheelchairs, and braces moved to a gentle beat, their laughter mixing with the music. It was messy, sure, but it had a kind of magic Richard wasn't used to. He stepped in with Lucas, looking like he'd just landed on another planet. "This looks chaotic," Richard said, his voice tight, like he was trying to make sense of the scene. "There's structure," Diana said calmly, standing beside him. "It's just not the kind you're used to." She turned to Lucas, her smile warm and inviting. "Want to join in?" Lucas glanced at his dad hesitant, his hands gripping his crutches. Richard gave a small nod, his face softening just a bit. "Go for it," he said. "I'm right here." Diana guided Lucas toward the group, her presence steady and encouraging. Zoe, watching Richard's tense posture, pulled up a chair for him. "First day's always rough," she said, her voice kind. "For parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Richard said, crossing his arms as he sat. "I've got the best rehab specialist in the country for Lucas." Zoe tilted her head, unfazed. "How's that working out for him?" Richard didn't answer, his eyes drifting to the kids, moving freely, each in their own way. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. Something about it hit him hard, and he couldn't look away. Just then, The door opened, and an older woman walked in, leaning on an ornate cane. Her gray hair was braided elegantly, and she carried herself like she owned the room. Zoe leaned toward Richard. "That's Dr. Elaine Mercer," she whispered. "Neuroscientist, used to teach at Harvard, specializes in brain plasticity." Dr. Mercer greeted the kids with a warm smile, but when she spotted Richard, her eyes sharpened. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice calm but pointed. "Didn't expect to see you here, considering you've shot down my research proposals 3 times. Richard blinked, caught off guard but trying to play it cool. "I didn't know you were tied to this place." "I oversee the research here," Dr. Mercer said, her tone steady. "We're studying how non-directive movement, like what these kids are doing, helps rewire brains in children with motor challenges." Richard frowned, still processing. "I thought this was just a dance class." Diana stepped in, her voice confident but not pushy. "Freedom Steps is a pilot rehab program. We mix adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles. It's about giving kids like Lucas control over their movement." Richard's eyes narrowed, piecing it together. "You're telling me you're running a research program and working as a waitress?" "Funding's tight," Diana said, unflinching. "And yeah, you rejected our proposals 3 times. It hit Richard like a ton of bricks. "You were Dr. Mercer's co-author on those proposals," he said, the realization sinking in. Diana nodded. "Dropped out of my master's to take care of Zoe. But my work here, it's legit, and it's working." Richard stood there, stunned. Diana wasn't just some waitress who danced with his kid. She was a force, playing a game he hadn't even seen coming. All those years he'd spent building his empire, dismissing ideas like hers because they didn't fit his mold. He'd been wrong. The music kept playing, the kids kept moving, and Lucas was out there trying to balance on one crutch, his face a mix of focus and pride. Richard watched, his usual need for control slipping away. This place, these people, this moment, it wasn't about his money or his power. It was about something realer, something he'd been missing. The music at Freedom Steps flowed like a heartbeat, soft but steady, filling the community center with a kind of warmth that didn't need fancy decor to shine. Kids with crutches, wheelchairs, and braces moved to their own rhythms, each step or sway a small act of defiance against their challenges. Richard Montgomery stood at the back of the room, hands in his pockets, watching it all unfold. For once, the guy who built an empire wasn't calling the shots. And honestly, he looked like he didn't know what to do with that. Lucas, his son, was out there in the mix, balancing on one crutch, his movements shaky but determined. The kid who'd spent 2 years being poked and prodded by specialists was finally doing something on his own terms. Diana Johnson stood off to the side, watching Lucas with a quiet smile, like she knew exactly what this moment meant. She'd always believed the real power came from within, not from some expert with a clipboard. Richard's eyes kept drifting to his son, and you could see something shifting in him. He wasn't used to this, not the chaos, not the freedom, not the way Lucas looked alive. He turned to Diana, his voice low, almost like he was testing the words. "You think Lucas is ready to join them for real?" Diana nodded, her smile soft but sure. "He's been ready, Richard. He just needed space to show it." Richard watched Lucas take another wobbly step, his crutch tapping the floor. For years, Richard had been obsessed with fixing his son, therapists, doctors, the best money could buy. But now, seeing Lucas out there, choosing his own path, Richard got it. He'd been so busy trying to control everything, he'd forgotten to let Lucas be Lucas. "You're right," he said quietly, the words heavy with something new, realization, maybe even regret. I've been so caught up in fixing him, I didn't see him. Diana's eyes softened. It's not about fixing, Richard, she said, her voice gentle but firm. It's about letting him lead, giving him room to find his own way. Just then, Dr. Elaine Mercer, the neuroscientist with the commanding presence, walked over. Her gray braids gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her cane clicked against the floor with every step. She'd been watching Richard, sizing him up since he walked in. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her tone calm but with that same edge from earlier. "You're seeing something special here. This isn't just kids dancing." Richard nodded, still processing. "I'm starting to get that. You said this is about rewiring brains?" "Exactly, Doctor," Mercer said, her voice steady. "Freedom Steps uses non-directive movement to help kids like Lucas reconfigure neural pathways. It's not therapy in the way you're used to. It's autonomy, and it's working." Richard's gaze flicked to Diana. "And you're part of this research?" "Co-author," Diana said, standing tall. "I've been working with Dr. Mercer for years, even while juggling 3 jobs. We're proving that kids with motor challenges can thrive when you give them control, not constraints." Richard let out a slow breath, like the weight of it all was finally hitting him. "I turned down your proposals 3 times, he said, guilt creeping into his voice. "I didn't see it then." Diana didn't sugarcoat it. "We've been scraping by without funding, but we're still here because this matters." The room kept moving, kids laughing, music pulsing, parents watching with a mix of pride and nerves. Lucas was in the thick of it now, trying a new move with another kid, his face lit up with focus. Richard watched, and for the first time, he didn't see a problem to solve. He saw his son, strong in ways he'd never noticed. "Lucas," Richard called, his voice softer than before. "You want to keep going?" Lucas turned, his eyes wide but confident. He nodded, gripping his crutch a little tighter. With a small push from Diana, he moved back to the group, his steps still slow but surer now. The sound of his crutch on the floor wasn't a reminder of limits anymore. It was proof he was moving forward. Diana turned to Richard, her voice quiet but clear. "This is what happens when you let them lead. You can't force it. They find their strength when you step back." Richard's throat tightened. He looked at Lucas, then back at Diana, and something broke open in him. "Thank you," he said, the words raw and real, "for showing me this." Diana shook her head, her smile gentle. "Don't thank me. Lucas is the one doing the work. He's the one you need to see." As Richard stood there, watching his son, he felt it, a shift he couldn't ignore. The man who'd spent his life chasing control, building walls of wealth and power, was starting to see the world differently. And it all started with one dance, one moment where a waitress said yes to a kid reaching out. But Diana, she wasn't done. Back in her apartment, that notebook under her bed held more than just notes. It was a roadmap, a plan to change lives, to challenge systems, to give kids like Lucas and people like Richard a chance to grow. She'd known from the start that dancing with Lucas wasn't just a kind gesture. It was a spark, one she'd been waiting to ignite. Richard didn't know it yet, but his empire of privilege was about to meet its match. Diana wasn't here to fit into his world. She was here to shake it up. And Freedom Steps? It was just the beginning. The music faded as the session wrapped up, but the energy lingered. Lucas made his way back to Richard, his face flushed with effort and pride. For the first time in years, father and son looked at each other, really saw each other. And in that moment, Richard knew the greatest lessons weren't the ones you could buy. They were the ones you lived.